Uganda, or Chegalani, as we call there. So just a few words. The formats will remain the same. So basically, Jeremy have a few slides to show that will allow us to have an introduction about the region. Don't hesitate to post any question on the chat box. We really encourage you to focus on the topic, not to have any sensitive questions to make us uncomfortable. But we are happy to answer any of the question for sure. Another point is this time we'll mainly focus on Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya because each and every countries are very complex, first of all, and that's really the expertise of Jeremy. We'll work on probably have another webinar on Ethiopia in future. So all the Ethiopian questions and any burning question, any burning topics in East Africa won't be covered. So please use the chat box. We'll be happy to ask the questions to Jeremy. So I think the floor is yours, Jeremy. Please share your slides. I hope the IT issues are okay now. And then I let you start. You're on mute, Jeremy. I don't know if you can hear me.
Hello, yes, I can hear you. I'm having some IT troubles with the presentation. So what I'm going to do is actually share the presentation with Xian, and then she can probably show it on her screen. But in the meantime, what I will do is maybe I can start with an introduction about myself. So the name is Jeremy Mpalampa. I'm based in Uganda, in Kampala. I work with Vocafe as the sort of general manager of the Chagalani operation. Now, I've been in the coffee industry for about 12 years, having started my coffee career in Uganda as a trader before moving on to Tanzania, also with Vocafe, and then moved on to Vietnam, where I did spend 4 years, and then back in Uganda in this role from about a year ago. Now, whilst we get the screen set up,
Just 1 second.
Sorry, just give me a minute to.
Yeah, you don't find the button to share your screen, correct?
No, it's not letting me.
Okay.
Because it's disabled by the host.
Okay, can you share it by email to myself?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. I think we are getting better with in-person events with NextGen. The webinar is too old school for us.
Yes. Okay, just send it over to you.
Okay. Maybe you can start maybe a few points, even if the slides will come in a minute. Just because we are running out of time. So feel free to start, and I will be either myself or Xian will share the screen. But I think we can't wait for more. Go for it. Thank you.
Perfect. do that. Okay, very good. So just also a bit about Bocafe. Maybe I'll start with that. So we are basically a coffee trade house based out of Switzerland. We participate in the coffee value chain, right through from sourcing through to processing, trade, shipping, importation, and then distribution at destination. Now, as part of this presentation, the SCTA Next Gen leadership did ask me to speak about East Africa, so the balance sheet, as well as the opportunities and challenges that we do see in East Africa. Now, I will start with the sort of global market view, which basically covers the thank you. Yes, which basically covers what we've been seeing over the last 9 months of the year. Now, what we've actually seen is the robust balance sheet has actually moved into a deficit for the third consecutive year. And that's really driven by the tightness that we've been seeing on the supply side of Robusta. And if you look at the chart to the right of the screen, you can see the green bars. Those actually represent the Robusta balance sheet deficits. Now, we've also seen the global economy in itself has been bleak, and that really has been specifically across the traditional coffee consuming markets, where we've actually seen post-COVID high inflation that has really prompted a rise in interest rate, which in a way has tightened credit conditions in many of the traditional consuming markets. And of course, as a result, what that has led to is a decline in household income. Now, something important to note here is that, on the other hand, we are seeing emerging markets that have been faring much better in contrast, where we've seen much lower inflation rates and to some extent better, let's say, growth prospects. Now, with that in view, what we do see is really consumption growing at an average of, say, 3.2% in the emerging markets, as opposed to give or take about 2% in the traditional markets. Now, another important point to note over here also is, despite this, the Arabica Robusta futures arbitrage that we did see recently collapse to about 40 cents from an average of give or take 86 cents for the first 9 months of the year. There's very little evidence that we see that suggests that shift in demand towards the low-grade Arabicas away from Robustas. So by and large, what this is really telling us is, the Robusta balance sheet remains tight, and at the moment, there's very little shift towards solving that tightness that we do see. Next slide, please, Arthur. Now, talking about the washed Arabicas, we sort of take a step back into the recently concluded 22-23 coffee season in particular, where we did see very poor weather conditions, to some extent too much rain in Central America, which obviously did reduce yields. Now, if we look at the chart at the bottom, we can see that yields have been dropping for the last sort of 4 or 5 years across the Arabica, washed Arabica complex on a crop year basis. And, a big part of it really has been the lack of reinvestment. And this has really been driven by much lower New York prices, coupled with differentials that have been weak. So that really has not prompted any investment or replanting within the washed Arabica complex. I think to add to that also, there's been this migration that's been taking place from Central America into the US, so places like El Salvador, Guatemala. We've seen farmers sort of making that move into the US. So that in itself has created farms that have been abandoned, and the investment hasn't been taking place as it should have been. Now, as we move into FY 23-24, what we have seen is obviously a bounce back of Colombia. But I think something taken into account is much as, we have seen the supply side of the washed balance sheet not being as supported. Colombia in itself, the fact that, we did see a weaker peso has actually seen the Colombian farmers continue to benefit from those farm prices. So in a way, reinvestment has been occurring, and we've then been seeing a steady supply from Colombia. Next slide, please.
I'm really sorry, I will be the bad cop here, but we're running out of time a bit. So I think if it's great view on the global SND. If you can cover this slide and the overall SND a bit faster, so that we can focus on the East Africa, that would be great, Jeremy.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So okay, absolutely. So very quickly on the Robusta side, what we've seen is Uganda, where production has been growing, with a lot of new plantings that have been taking place as production production started coming into play. However, there's some downside because of drought. Important to note is for Robustas in the Conilons, we did see very strong supply in 22-23, but of course this was then met with strong internal demand for the Conilons as well. Longer term, looking at the Robusta space in general, Conilons and Brazil will be a key driver, purely from a point of area as well as yield expansion. We, however, just have to be aware of the Asian Robustas, which deemed to appear to have peaked with, for example, places like Vietnam, where you're seeing sort of rising land prices, or alternative opportunities for some of the farmers by planting other crops, and so basically generally moving away from the coffee production, so to speak. Let's move to the next slide, please. Okay, so the next few slides will then start digging deep into the East African origin specifically. I'll start with Tanzania, and then make my way into Uganda, and make my way to Kenya, and then into Uganda. So starting off with the global picture, what we do see is East Africa in general, on an Arabica standpoint, contributes about 5% to the total Arabica supply, and those are the countries of Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya. I think we can't ignore or forget Ethiopia, which is the largest Arabica producer, bringing about 7.2 to about 7.5 million bags of production per annum. We also need to remember we've got Rwanda and Burundi, which fit more into the specialty category, contributing about 200 to 300,000 bags for Burundi, and about 320 to about 350,000 bags for Rwanda. Now, important to note over here that you know, the Arabica complex in itself is largely driven by still Brazil, which obviously has continued to grow within the supply end. And in that way, what we do see is the decline in production in Kenya, whilst sort of stable production out of Uganda and Kenya have kind of kept the overall East African supply and within that sort of 5% range. Now, moving on to the Robusta side, we have continued to see growth within Uganda, and that in a way has been sort of East Africa's contribution into the global Robusta supply end, move from about give or take 5% to about 8% currently as we speak. Okay, next slide. So on this slide, we basically highlight the importance of coffee as a key contributor to the export earnings for the respective countries in East Africa. Now, Burundi, which you can see at the top there, has about 40% of its export earnings coming from coffee. Uganda currently stands at about 18% of all its export earnings, whilst we also see other countries like Tanzania and Kenya, respectively, coming in at 8% and 7% respectively. Now, we have other countries on there, for example, Rwanda, just falling short of 10%. So basically what this is telling us is coffee still remains an important driver of the East African countries that actually do produce coffee. Next slide, please. Okay, now we begin zeroing down on the specific countries, beginning with Tanzania. Now, Tanzania production is primarily grown in the northwest area of Kagera, where we have about 70% of the Robusta production coming from. This then is followed by sort of Morogoro and sort of the Mwanza area. On the other hand, for the Arabicas, we have about 70% of the Arabicas coming from the southern parts of Tanzania, which is mainly Mbinga and Mbeya. Traditionally, Arabicas were mainly grown in the northern part of Tanzania, but we've currently seen over the last sort of decade or so, the south gaining a lot more traction with increased area of planting, where advantage has been taken off there, so expansion has taken place in that region. Now, of the Arabicas that come out of Tanzania, about 75% of it is washed, which kind of gives a range of give or take 22 to 35% of the total production, and that really comes from the south. Now, in the chart that we do see on the right-hand side, we have the breakdown of Robusta and Arabica production from Tanzania. And what we do see over there is an average of give or take 25 to 30,000 tons with a strong on-off cycle across the Arabicas. And then also on the Robusta, we do see that on-off cycle being demonstrated there with sort of a low around 15,000 tons and sort of peaking at 27,000 tons. Important to note that fertilizer applications across most parts of Africa, and we'll see a bit more of that later in the presentation, is quite low, and some extent use of mechanized farming as well is quite low in most of these origins, and for that reason you tend to have quite a bit of volatility in the crop production cycles. Next slide, please. Okay. Over here, what we do have is we talk a bit about some of the initiatives that have driven the production in Tanzania. Now, the government of Tanzania did come up with a plan 21-25, the coffee plan. And the idea with that sort of plan or strategy was to provide about 20 million seedlings per annum to coffee farmers every year. Now, this in itself has gained quite a bit of traction within Tanzania, and as a result, if you looked at the chart on the bottom left-hand side, you can see the hectarage already beginning to grow as a result of this strategy to actually have seedlings distributed to farmers. Now, we do see on average hectarage has increased, say, from about 79,000 tons to about 84,000 tons in 21-22 over this period that's demonstrated over here. But then we continue to see yields remaining relatively low. Now, we see for Tanzania, based on the 21-22, the average yield is about 7.5 bags, 60 kilo bags per hectare. Which still remains quite low in the global context, because if we say, took, for example, a country like Colombia, we're talking about 15 bags per hectare, whilst Brazil, we're talking about 25 to 30 bags per hectare. So in a global context, these yields still show that there's room for growth over there. If we then moved on to the Robusta complex, we've also seen a similar seedling distribution strategy, and that in a way has in many respects driven to that big increase in acreage that we're seeing in Tanzania. That moved from about 40 to about 41,000 hectares of coffee under cultivation. Now, yields in themselves have remained fairly within that 0.4 tons to about 0.7 tons per hectare. And again, similar to the Arabicas, these yields remain quite low and obviously present an opportunity for an increase. I think in regards to benchmarking, say, to other origins, if we took, for example, the current Vietnam yield per hectare, that comes in at give or take, say, 3 tons per hectare, whilst Brazil on the Conilongs is down at about, or up at about 2 tons per hectare. So again, with 0.6 tons per hectare, there is room for growth over there. Next slide, please. Now, moving on to Kenya. Slightly different story. So in Kenya, what we do see is 60% of the coffee production grown across the central regions. This is regions of mainly Kiambu, Nyeri, Murang'a, as well as Kirinyaga. Now, producer cooperatives aggregate and market about 80% of the coffee in Kenya, with the rest being marketed by sort of private owned businesses or individuals. And whilst the coffee exchange in itself markets and handles about 90% of the Kenyan coffee sales. This is an evolving situation given the current sort of regulatory changes that are taken to that have taken into effect in Kenya, and I believe that is still an ongoing discussion. Now, moving on to the coffee hectarage, I think that's an important one for Kenya to take note of. Is we continue to see a decline in coffee and cultivation in Kenya. And this mainly because of a competing land use. Now, many of these farms are traditionally quite close to the capital or the areas of the urbanized areas. So what we're seeing is a move from the real estate sector to kind of absorb some of these formerly coffee plantations. But then also there are other crops that are beginning to sort of pick up on that acreage that was originally occupied by coffee. So of course, as a result, that's bringing the total coffee under cultivation number lower, but then also in effect, obviously impacting the export volumes. So what we do see in the chart at the bottom right is, of course, that decline of coffee and hectarage in Kenya, but then also similar to Tanzania, like we saw earlier, the yields in Kenya are also sitting at about between 6 to about 7.5 bags per hectare, which similarly provides a big opportunity for growth up there. Next slide, please. Okay, in this slide, we try to talk about the differentials and how that actually feeds into the global picture that we sort of touched upon earlier in the slides. Now, over the last decade, the Kenyan differentials themselves have remained fairly elevated. Again, this is really being supported more by the supply side and to some extent stable demand for the sort of premium washed Arabica segment. That also plays the same for Tanzania, which you do see at the bottom there with the yellow line. Now, this has changed in the last sort of year or so. Again, based on the sort of global picture, where we have seen the Kenyan and Tanzanian differentials weaken. Now, on the other hand, the Ugandan drugas, for those who are not familiar with the term druga, that really stands for dry Uganda Arabica. So the Ugandan dry Uganda Arabicas, or naturals as they are, have also have seen an appreciation in differentials. And this really has been as a result of that limited supply out of Ethiopia, but then more so this shift that we spoke about much earlier from the primary Robustas into the sort of lower priced natural Arabicas. So the blue chart that you see over there, the blue line that you do see over there, really demonstrates that movement or appreciation within the natural Arabicas complex in Uganda. Okay, moving on to Uganda. Uganda in itself has a coffee sector that where production is mainly driven by smallholder farmers, intercropped with other food crops such as bananas. And I think what we are seeing, the trend is some of the higher value crops such as vanilla, cocoa, also coming in as potential intercrops within the coffee farms. And that's mainly due to stabilized earning potential that some of the farmers currently have. Now, Robusta in itself mainly grows in the central regions of Uganda. And if we looked at that map of Uganda, what you do see, the sort of light shade of green across the center is really the areas in which the Arabicas can grow. And then what you have on the peripheries of the country, that's in the northwest, in the east, and also in the southwest, where you have the shaded green with the stripes at the Arabica growing regions. And of course, that's really because also of the landscape of the country. So most of the highlands actually found in the peripheries of the country. Now, Uganda in itself has seen a tremendous growth within the Robustas, and this has really been largely driven by mass plantings of Robustas, mainly driven by a drive by the UCDA, as well as a number of government agencies, plus also the private sector, with the drive around distributing improved variety planting material that has actually been infilled in some of the existing farms, but then has also seen a significant area expansion, which we will see in the next slide. Now, production in itself has been centered across all the sort of key Robusta growing regions. There's been a promotion of mainly the high-yielding sort of clonal plants, and some of the elite varieties that were low-yielding have been slowly phased out of the country. Now, moving on to the specific yields, I'll start with the Robustas. What we can see over there is, if we looked at the chart from 2014-15 to 21-22, we can see that yields in themselves has kind of moved from an average of 0.8, 0.9 to just over, let's say, 1 to 1.2. That is tons per hectare in terms of productivity. So a bit of an increase in productivity. And then also we can see the area growth that has moved from about, 180,000 to today about 300,000 of coffee under and of hectarage with coffee planted on it. On the Arabica front, we also have seen an increment of coffee under hectarage. We have seen the move from about 106,000 hectares all the way up to about 117,000 hectares. Now, a big part of this is mainly occurring in the western parts of the country, but then there are also some infillings that are happening in some of the existing plants, some of the existing plantations in the eastern parts of the country. We can see from an Arabica yield standpoint that the yields have remained, by and large around, 0.5 tons per hectare, which still remains also quite low in comparison, say, to countries like Tanzania and Brazil, where we're seeing numbers closer to 1 ton and 0.9 tons per hectare. Next slide, please. Okay, so we also took a look at some of the export markets and how these have evolved over the years for the 3 East African countries. What we see generally from the trend here is the EU remains an important destination for all the 3 East African countries. If we looked at Uganda specifically, you can see Uganda has about 60% of equipment going into the European Union. That has remained fairly stable. Kenyan exports, on the other hand, also have a significant contribution into the EU, but then there's also a Japan that is increasing. And when we look at it in entirety, about 90% of the exports actually end up between these 2 countries. Now, similarly for Tanzania, the EU remains important, but then you've also got Japan, which is a very important offtake for Tanzania. And between the two, these account for about 70% of the demand annually. Now, one of the key trends that we are observing at the moment is demand picking up from parts of North Africa as well as South Africa. In North Africa, it's mainly countries like Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia. And again, these kind of demonstrate how the global S&D would kind of fit into some of the dynamics that we see in the region. For example, when we did have the situation post-COVID, when we had the tight freight situation where we had tightness in container equipment out of Asia, as well as surging freight rates, we did see quite a bit of demand coming to Uganda for Ugandan Robustas, simply as a bridge for that demand that was coming in. So some of it has remained and some of it continues to grow. And whilst also in parts like South Africa, where you're beginning to see some investment in the industry or roasting space, we're beginning to see a lot more interest coming in from the southern part of Africa as well. So an interesting trend, one that we need to keep in view, particularly as production keeps increasing in these countries. Next slide, please. In the next slide, we touch a bit on what farm sizes in East Africa look like in comparison to the other sort of key origins, but then also take a deep dive into what the average fertilizer application looks like in East Africa in comparison to some of the other key production origins. And we split this by Arabica as well as Robusta. I think what we do see here is from a fertilizer application standpoint, it's very clear that within East Africa, focusing on Uganda and Tanzania, there is very little or hardly any application in terms of inputs or fertilizer in the farms in comparison to other origins. If I looked at the Arabica, for example, in Uganda, you see it's extremely small. For Tanzania, you're talking about 2-3 bags per hectare, which if you compare that to Brazil, where yields are fairly high, you're talking numbers of about 25 bags per hectare. The same applies for Robustas, where you have hardly any application of fertilizers, whilst Vietnam is up at about 35-40 bags per hectare. Now, looking at it differently from the size of the farms, we do know that in East Africa, most of the farm sizes remain fairly small, given that most coffee is cultivated by smallholder farmers. We can see from the chart here, the Arabica farm sizes for Uganda and Tanzania come in just under 10, give or take 10 hectares per farm. For Tanzania, that's mainly in the southern part of the country where you see these bigger farms. But again, if you compare that to some of the other Arabica origins like Honduras, India, as well as Guatemala and Brazil, that is sort of on the lower end. Similarly, if we looked at the Robusta situation, farm sizes there are much, much smaller. And if we compare those to what we see out of Indonesia, India, and Brazil, again, those are quite small. We can move to the next slide, please.
So sorry to interrupt once again. So we already 40 minutes into this webinar. So right now we'll start to talk about EUDR. I would suggest that we go quickly on EUDR, and if any question in the audience would come up about EUDR, especially for East Africa, we'll be happy to forward the question to you. I think we'll have to go a bit faster than expected on EUDR. So if Jeremy, you can focus on EUDR East Africa mainly, and then if a question comes up, we'll be happy to ask you directly.
Absolutely. Thank you. Will do. Mm-hmm. So I think with EUDR, I think I understood already we have some previous sessions on EUDR, so I won't spend too much time on the timeline. What we do know over here is that 30th of December 2024, all coffee going to the EU needs to be compliant. So I'll then move to the next slide and focus on EUDR in East Africa. We'll look specifically at Uganda. Now, we do know across the 3 East African countries, it's very, very early days with regards to the implementation or activities that build up to the compliance. Now, in Uganda, what the current status is there was a regulation that was passed in 2021, where there's a provision for the Coffee Authority to establish a national coffee register, which basically covers the registration of farmers and supply chain actors across the country. That currently needs to come into play just to ensure that there is data capture for all farmers in the country. The next is there's a central database that has already been set up. This is spearheaded by the UCDA, and the idea there is that exporters should be able to link into this database to have details of all the respective farmers. Now, the application itself has been finalized. However, there's still discussions ongoing around the funding of the entire rollout, but then also the management of that database system. Now, at the moment, what we do see in Uganda is there are private sector-led initiatives that continue to be ongoing, and these happen in different pockets of the country where a number of private sector actors do have initiatives, and this is right through from exporters through to coffee farmer alliances, for example. But again, we must appreciate that these types of initiatives are costly and in many respects come with duplication of these efforts of registering farmers. So indeed, having a centralized approach for the country would be very welcome and would save on cost as well as this duplication that we see. Now, again, I just must reiterate that similarly across all the other East African countries, there's a lot of discussions already taking place from government agencies to having development partners on board as well as private sector actors to try and understand how best this compliance can be fast-tracked, given that we have set hard deadlines to achieve over there. Right, so I'll probably touch on a couple more slides. One is on supply chain challenges that we do see in East Africa, and I'll quickly run through them. One of them is climate change impact and what that really means for East African farmers, where we're seeing irregular rainfall patterns, increased temperatures. We do see farm sizes that are very small, fragmented, with low productivity. That then begins challenging the concept around income that the farmer can actually, or viable income the farmer can actually take from a small plot of land. There are challenges around post-harvest handling, basically how coffee is handled after it's harvested, making sure that quality is preserved rather than distracted as you get the coffee into the market. Infrastructure remains a big challenge, particularly for some remote locations. The picture you see over there is a farm in Rwenzori, in one of the high altitudes. Getting there is a bit challenging, so infrastructure is a challenge. Access to finance, that's very widely spoken about, and this is right through from across the value chain, so smallholder farmers having access to finance, moving through to aggregators and exporters, and then finally the complex regulations. We've touched a bit on some of the regulatory changes in Kenya. There are some that do take place in parts of the other parts of East Africa, but some of these then become challenging to navigate. Now, on the other side, we do have opportunities that we do see in the region. Certainly, the increased adoption of good agricultural practices will improve yields, and we have seen in the presentation that there is room or scope to grow in terms of yield. The specialty focus, that's a growing trend across the country, actually across the region as a whole. And I think this in itself is unlocking opportunities for sort of premiums and higher pricing to be paid for coffees that are deserving of it. We continue seeing an increased drive for planting of coffee. We've seen the strategy from Tanzania government around the 21-25 plan. We're also aware of the ambitious plans that the Uganda Coffee Development Authority has to achieve 20 million bags by 2030. This is very well supported by an increased plantation plantings drive. We also continue to see initiatives that support added value across the entire value chain. Now, this may be in terms of processing, this may be in terms of converting green coffee into ready to drink or coffee for consumption. Now, all these incentives, all these initiatives come with incentives such as allocation of land, tax incentives, as well as soft funding to the private sector to actually tap these opportunities. Next, we also see some dedicated financing coming into play here. This is from development banks being capitalized, some specific coffee funds being locked in with specific banks. We have development partners also coming into play here and supporting different parts of the value chain from a financing standpoint. And also what we do see is communities coming together in what we call village savings and loan associations, where they contribute as a coffee community and then come back and borrow funds from these savings to support some of their needs, for example, fertilizer purchasing, maybe planting material purchasing, and so on and so forth. And then finally, we are seeing infrastructure improving. Road networks are being constructed. We are seeing the railway transportation development. I'll give an example there in Kenya, for example, where you do have coffee exports now departing from Nairobi ICDs all the way down to Mombasa on trains. We do know there is an extension of the railway that is currently in process in the Uganda end, and I believe once that once that project comes to fruition, then maybe there will be an opportunity for railing of cargo from Kampala down to Mombasa.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. I think we're reaching the end. So it comes now to the question part. Thank you so much to have rushed. It was a bit challenging in terms of timing. There are so many things to say about this very interesting, amazing region. First of all, I want to remind the audience that we won't be able to cover Ethiopia this time. As you can see, that we covered only 3 countries very different from each other's. So thanks again, Jeremy, to have covered that. And we'll work on another webinar for Ethiopia, which is a bit the elephant in the room here, of course. But I think that was a great approach on East Africa from you, Jeremy. Thanks so much. So we'll start with a question, something that you mentioned already for Kenya. So we face big challenges for the young generation being more connected, more urban. This generation not to be so interested into the coffee sector. What would you say about East Africa? And feel free to take East Africa as one or just split from a country to another to answer this question.
Okay. Great question. I think we do know East Africa has a fairly young population. We do know coffee is a sector that has been in play for quite a while. Now, with the younger generation, some of the initiatives that at least we have seen in Uganda is the structure that involves what we call youth teams, where some organizations have actually gone ahead and trained young people on equipping them with coffee skills, such that they can actually provide services to coffee farmers. And these could be services around, agronomy on the farms, for example, supporting them with pruning, training agricultural practices, and the farmers actually paying these young people for the service that they do offer. We've seen very successful initiatives like this in parts of Eastern Uganda, as well as parts of Western Uganda. Now, we're also seeing an emerging trend of coffee consumption within the East African countries. I have met quite a few young people who are involved in the roasting of value addition space, driving that consumption trend, finding innovative ways around consuming coffee, trying to see how they can promote coffee. That in itself is also providing greater employment opportunities for some of the young people in the city. Now, I think as, of course, domestic consumption continues to grow, that in itself will start seeing, more and more opportunities start coming up for people that are also interested in coffee above and beyond just the agronomy space. Now, if I came back to the agronomy space, what we do see is, and if I took an example of the Robusta balance sheet, where we are seeing that tightness, we are seeing opportunities where the governments are providing planting material. I believe if we look down another 5 to 10 years, there will be opportunities for those who are invested in planting of coffee, given that there's room to scale on the yield side, like we've seen, but then more so there's room also for a better pricing, particularly as we kind of see this tightness in the Robusta supply end, for example.
And
now,
yes. Sorry to interrupt you, because there was a question about planting. I think if you can bounce on this one, that was interesting question about how. So you described that Tanzania and Uganda had growing areas, especially for Arabica, but I guess it applies also for Robusta. Does it imply that there is a land use change, or does it imply that there is more deforestation? So what's your view? And I think it applies mainly for Tanzania and Uganda.
Yes, I think to that end, and that's where I was coming to, what we are seeing is, given the pricing prospects at the moment, and also the planting material availability, what we are seeing is a number of young people actually exploring planting coffee on some of the land that presumably they had, family land that they had maybe in the coffee production zones, and are actively taking up this opportunity to go back and plant coffee. And I think that in a way is providing this acreage expansion that we are seeing in East Africa. And I would say this really applies to both Uganda and Tanzania from what we are seeing.
Okay. Another one, it's about this low yield, especially in Uganda and especially in Arabica region. Can you tell us about this and a bit more about this? Sorry. What's the reason? Is there any solution coming up? Yeah, what's your feeling about this? Because that's true that the yields are pretty low. Yeah, so that would be the next question.
Okay, so looking at the yields, I think one of the key drivers of the yield in itself is the fact that I'd say two key drivers. One is good agricultural practices. I think what we've seen in some of the Arabica regions is the systematic farm calendar of farm practices are not allowing the crop to actually give as much productivity as it should do. And I'll give an example like pruning, where if a crop is pruned, then that allows for a lot more nutrient movement, and that will naturally give a much better yield. Now, having this sort of planned practices on the ground, having trainings around good agricultural practices, adopting a very basic integrated pest management system, would in many ways unlock yield in the first case. And those are actually not too expensive methods of unlocking the first stage of yield. The second stage is really around boosting the soil structure. What we've realized is a number of the soils in some of the Arabica growing regions are actually depleting, in the sense that there's been constant production, but there's been no, let's say, nutrient reinjection into the soils. Now, having a soil analysis done and then obviously following up with either organic or even inorganic fertilizers to some extent will help with boosting the productivity. One of the slides that we did discuss did show fertilizer application vis-a-vis yield. And I think what we can see there is with that, with increased fertilizer application, we should very easily unlock some of the yield potential that is trapped as a result of, in my view, these two key issues. Now, another third dimension that I could add there is also around the fact that, we are very heavily weather dependent. In many of the farms, irrigation or controlled watering of the plants is not being used. Now, there could be some very cheap cheaper methods that could be applied in this case. For example, having water trapped and then gravity flow in some of the farms. That could also help with inducing, for example, different stages of the plant, but then also providing that constant watering as and when the crop needs it to ensure that full potential in the yield end is actually achieved in these crops.
Okay. I think there are always a last minute question coming up, but I think that will be the last one. Personally, how do you see Uganda role in the world of Robusta in the next 10 or 20 years globally? Do you see? Are you confident and ambitious on the role of Uganda, or facing new challenges coming up in future?
Yes, that's a great question. I think looking at where the growth in Robusta currently stands today, we touched a bit on Brazil, but then we also recognize that Uganda is one of the origins where you're seeing growth within the Robusta space. Now, there are ambitious targets that have been set out there by the UCDA around achieving this 30 million bag or 20 million bags by 2030. Now, of course, there's been a lot of distribution of seedlings around that. I think to one of the earlier questions, you're seeing some younger people actively taking up coffee cultivation. Acreage is expanding. So I feel that Uganda's got an important role to play in the global Robusta space in the coming years. Given that we do expect to see strong demand for Robusta remaining, we expect to see continued consumption growing. So definitely there's a good opportunity for Uganda to kind of play a role in the global Robusta space.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. We have to stop now. It's been an hour. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Just a few words before we hang up. We will post a lot of news about SCTA Next Gen coming up for the next events. Don't hesitate to follow us on YouTube, etc. You will find the webinar, especially about EUDR and SND. This one will be posted by the end of this month, and a lot of news are coming up. Thank you so much again, Jeremy. That was a pleasure, and we keep in touch. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.